Hello, I'm Bruce Zimmerman, and this is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week. Now, in our gardens at this time of year, we always have to go and sort of say, okay, what are we supposed to be doing? And with our gardens being about a month late, we haven't had a killing frost here in St. Catharines and Niagara yet. And that is about one whole month late. So a lot of plant material are still green. Some have not even achieved the fall color that we would expect. Some have. Some have also really gotten some of the fall color from stress, because we did have that warm, cold, and then wet and dry period in early fall, late summer. Result is that you've got some very mixed up plants out there. So what do? Well, you have to sort of hedge your bets here, first of all. A lot of plant material is not ready to go dormant, has not gone dormant, and is not ready to be pruned or cut back. Many of the perennials are barely showing winter color or dormancy, so they're not going to be cut back. Some of them, this is quite all right, because let's say the ornamental grasses, for instance, are just coming in my garden into full bloom, and that means they're going to be interesting for the winter. You can leave them up and give winter interest to your garden. Some of the other plant material, like the perennial hibiscus, are not really even showing fall color. They haven't dropped their leaves. They're still sort of green. They're not really full, turgid type of leaves, but they are, let's just say, not ready to be really totally dormant. A lot of perennials have not died down either to their basal clumps. Some of them are even still blooming. Snapdragons are still going crazy in my garden. I still have never planted a snap garden in some 30-odd years in my garden, but they keep showing up. I let them go. If I like it, then I like the color, then it stays. But they're still blooming. Hostas, many of the hostas have not gone into their yellow fall color, so they can't be trimmed down yet. And that is very strange. A couple of the hydrangeas are not doing anything. In other words, they've got a little bit of fall color. Some of them are still blooming. Some of them are showing their big old heads and giving you some interest in your garden, because they're, of course, colored old heads. And so you can leave them alone. My English ivy is growing like a weed, and I don't want to trim it because, of course, it's not really going to heal at this time of year from the pruning. And I've got caught betwixt and between. I've had 2 prunings on them, and yet they are still actively growing with all the moisture, warmth, and the long fall that we've had. With the lawns are still being cut. They can be cut short. Mine is being allowed to stay long so it grows against any of the white grub that are in there. We'll see how that works as an experiment. So when you only have nematodes as the answer for that problem, this one might also be an answer as well. So we'll see what happens and how that works. The tomatoes are still ripening in my garden, and I'm still getting mainly the smaller ones as opposed to the larger tomatoes. But these are just my regular tomatoes. The Carolina Golds are doing great. Celebrity is doing very, very well. So as a result, we've got a few large tomatoes that aren't as large as they were in the summertime, but they are ripening up. And of course, the little guys are just doing great guns because they're being allowed to ripen up much later. Normally, what we would do with those is we would trim the tops so that the remaining fruit would finish ripening up before the frost. But the frost hasn't arrived yet. And being a month late, they're still going great guns. The nights are a little cold, so some of the plants that I have out, how shall I say, summering on vacation that are to come inside for the winter have come in, and they are starting to acclimatize to our warmer houses. Some better than others, of course. I've used my garage also for a couple of my large ones. I'm going to see if one of those will actually survive in the garage. We'll see if it does. If it doesn't, that's fine too. But it'll be a good experiment to see. All of my Rex begonias are inside now because it is getting a little cold out there. And you want to keep them as healthy as possible. You don't want to frost them and bring them in. You want to bring them in and let them acclimatize to the warmer home, but they still need some light as well. They have been doing so well out there with the moisture, with the cooler temperatures. They've been sort of tucked in around a tree where they're in pots, and of course they're doing very, very well. My big white bird of paradise is doing extremely well. It's gotten 3 or 4 new leaves, which is good actually, but the leaves and the plant are getting much better, and it is starting to throw a baby off of the base, which will make it interesting if it survives for next year. It'll start to grow and, of course, fill in the bottom a little bit in the container. We'll see what happens. It's gotten to the point where the plant can't be potted up any larger, but I can probably go and add a little of the organic matter into the soil and top dress it so that it gets reinvigorated with the natural organic and all the other little microorganisms that are in the organic matter, and feed the organic matter and encourage them in the pot. So that will probably be done first thing in the spring. Many of the plant material just needs to be left alone. You can't trim evergreens now. You definitely, at this point, with all the rain we've actually had in the last little while, probably do not need to go and actually feed not feed them. You can't feed them, but you don't have to even water them either. So they're doing quite well. A few plant material have not sort of measured up. They'll be ripped out and disposed of this fall, and substitutes will be either planted this fall or in the spring. The substitutes are already on site, but either they'll winter in the container sunk in my vegetable garden after the tomatoes are finally ripped out, and we'll see what happens. There's a lot of people who don't do any tilling and preparing of soil in a vegetable garden. It does work for many people, but in many people in this area, I would recommend that we do dig it rough, and a vegetable garden, and add a little bit of organic material, or bury it actually, and then work it all up in the spring. Now, some people say you'll turn up seed. Well, the amount of seed that I turn up is so small, it's not worthwhile being a problem. And so I'm not worried about doing that. So it gets turned over, the soil is improved, and that's what you need to do to maximize your production in a vegetable garden. I'm Bruce Zimmerman. This is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week.